Aditya in front. Now, we go a long way. He was a student, believe it or not, he was in my class in grades 11 and 12. I taught him English literature, yes, St. Xavier's, Calcutta, my student from there. After that, he went to National Law School, Bangalore. He's a research fellow at the Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy here in Delhi, working a lot with constitutional reforms, hardcore constitutional lawyer. And a change of scene happened when he came to Delhi. He rediscovered a part of himself and his journey as a, I'll leave it to him to talk about his journey and how Delhi shaped him a bit differently. He still continues to be a hardcore lawyer, but this is a passion that he has inculcated ever since he's moved to Delhi. The city created this out of him. So I think Delhi has it in it, a strange passion, right? Okay, Aditya, it's all yours. Yeah.
Hello? Yeah. Thanks so much, ma'am, for that glowing introduction. It's an honor to be invited here to sort of present my blog to all of you. Hi, everyone. I'm Aditya. As ma'am said, I'm originally from Kolkata, and I'm now working as a lawyer in New Delhi. And ma'am rightly pointed out that although I'm very happily wedded to the law now, history has been an old flame of mine for quite a while. And having moved here last year, I found that flame got reignited for quite obvious reasons. The thing is, we tend to think of New Delhi as one city, one capital. Actually, it's a conglomerate of 7 cities, which have been built over and above and in and around each other, spanning across a timeline of about 1 millennium. And therefore, this is a city where the past, the present, and the future coexist in harmony. And if you have even the slightest inclination towards history, the urge to explore is very hard to resist. Now, the thing is, in Delhi, there's always been this sort of tradition that whoever comes here as a traveler, as an explorer, they chronicle their travels through prose, poetry, art, and increasingly photography. And I thought that it's only proper that I honor this tradition, which is why I've started this blog to sort of document my weekend sojourns across the 7 cities of Delhi. And therefore, the blog is named justontheweekend.wordpress.com. So what I'll be doing across the course of the next 30 minutes is I'll give you a brief glimpse into my blogging journey, share with you some truly titillating historical trivia, and ask you a few questions, in response to which I'm reliably informed that if you get them right, there are some exciting prizes which you will receive. So without further ado, allow me to take you on a short trip down memory lane. And the first stop on our journey today, all the way from 2022, is the late 12th century. So we are now in 1191 AD. And we find ourselves at the Kutub Minar complex, located in Mehrauli. You see, Mehrauli happens to be the first urban center of this area. And it was controlled initially by the Tomars, who were a Rajput clan. You might have heard of Surajpal Tomar, Anangpal Tomar, so on and so forth. After which it fell into the control of the Chauhans. And the most famous Chauhan ruler we all know is Prithviraj Chauhan. Although he ruled from Ajmer in Rajasthan, he exerted his control over this area of the country from Mehrauli. And he built what we today call the Kila Rai Pithora, which is a fort in that area. We are all also, we've been told that Mahmud Ghori came with his forces, joined hands with Jaichand, and toppled Prithviraj Chauhan. After which, the Islamic rule started in this part of the world. So Mahmud Ghori, what he did was, he delegated control of the area to one of his slaves, and this person was called Qutbuddin Aibak. And Qutbuddin Aibak was the first sort of sultan of the Delhi Sultanate. And it is after him that the Kutub Minar is very aptly named. They started the Mamluk dynasty, and they ruled for quite a while until Ghiyasuddin Balban perished in 1287. And the Delhi Sultanate continued from there. So let's take a short trip of the Kutub Minar complex and see what it can offer us today. The first stop is the Kuvat-ul-Islam Mosque, and the words Kuvat-ul-Islam means might of Islam. Now, very interestingly, although this is supposed to be a shrine to Islam, one of the first in India, if you have a close look at the pillars, these are very clearly un-Islamic, right? What had happened was when Qutbuddin wanted to start building the mosque, he wanted to do a quick job. So instead of constructing a mosque afresh, he decided to reuse pillars from Hindu and Jain temples, which were constructed by the Tomars nearby, and he sort of repurposed the pillars into the pillars of the Kuwatul-Islam Mosque. And let's take a closer look. You all know that in Islam, the depiction of natural figures is sort of prohibited. So what will they do now that they have Hindu pillars, where the very idea is to depict nature, is to depict organisms, human beings, gods and goddesses? So what had happened was, they started defacing the pillars one by one. So this happens to be actually a little fish that was, present on this pillar, and they defaced the head of the fish, because that too is a living organism. This was an Apsara. The name of this Apsara is Darpana Sundari. Unfortunately, she is no longer a Sundari anymore, and she has now been defaced. So this is the story of the pillars of the Kuwatul-Islam Mosque. Let's move a few meters to the right, and we will find ourselves in front of the screens. And you will know that in every mosque there are these screens which face the Mecca. And these are the screens of the Kuwatul-Islam Mosque. And on your right, in the very same complex, about 100 meters the other way, this is a college that was set up by Alauddin Khilji a few years later. Now let's take a closer look. And we will now play a comparing game. And there's a question coming up for those of you who fancy yourselves to be sort of Indian Indiana Joneses, if you will. Now look carefully. Both of these images are depicting arches. But there's something that is strikingly different in the way that these two arches have been constructed. Can anyone tell me what the big difference is, architecturally speaking? Look very carefully at the stones which sort of form the arch shape. Now, as you all know, the idea of an arch is that it's a shape which is used to support weight, right? And therefore, the arch needs to be constructed in a certain way. Now, look at the arch on your left. That arch was constructed at the time of Qutbuddin Aibak. This was when the craftsmen and the architects were all locals who were untrained in the Islamic tradition of arches. They didn't know what an arch was. In Hindu architecture, we use vertical pillars and horizontal beams to support weight. So the idea of an arch was alien to them. But Qutbuddin the Sultan said that, you see, I want arches because this is a mosque. And what could the craftsmen do? They did their best and they came up with this arch on your left. Now, just a few years later, at the time of Alauddin Khilji, by now, all of the craftsmen are trained in the Islamic tradition, and they can now construct the arches on your right. So now, in light of what I have told you, look again and tell me what the difference really is. It's purely architectural. That's correct, exactly. 10 points to Gryffindor. The idea here is that on your right, we call that a true arch. And on your left, what you see is a sham arch. Because on your right, the arches, the stones are arranged in a fan shape. And in the middle, you will see what is called a keystone. So that helps you support the weight. But on your right, all that they've done is they've lined up the stones horizontally and made it look like an arch. That's what the difference is, and therefore this is a sham arch and that's a true arch. Let's move on. Now, in the same complex, we all know that there is this famous iron pillar. We've all heard of the iron pillar. And the more famous trait of the iron pillar, of course, is this Sanskrit inscription, which is written in the Brahmi script, which is there on the iron pillar. Now, this inscription, if you read the English translation on your right, it refers to a certain King Chandra. And it's been concluded by historians that this is none other than Chandragupta II of the Gupta dynasty. Now, fair and good, everybody knows about this. But look at these little chips above and below the inscription, right? And we can take a closer look as well. Now, these happen to be chips which have flown off the iron pillar at some point in its history. Now, we've all been told that this is a very sturdy construction, it's not rusted in the last 1600 years. So can anyone tell me what these little chips, how did these come about? What's the story behind all of a sudden, in a perfect pillar, these little holes that you see, and we can zoom in and take a closer look. What can these possibly be? That's a valiant effort. Even I didn't think along those lines, but unfortunately that's not the correct answer. You see, the intention is right. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to destroy the pillar, right? Yeah, go for it. No, not exactly, but again, you're on the right track. They did try to do something to it. A hint that will help you is that none of the Delhi Sultanate Sultans had anything to do with this. The technology which caused this wasn't in existence at that time. And it was much later, in the mid-18th century when this happened. Close enough. Again, the intention is right, but the group is wrong. It's not the Britishers that did it.
Probably white is not rusting. They wanted to check that thing, and they wanted to.
Not really. Okay, so I'll give it away now. This was actually done by Ahmad Shah Durrani when he invaded India in the mid-18th century. He didn't like the fact that there's a pillar in the middle of a mosque which has an inscription in Sanskrit, which is an ode to Vishnu. What Mr. Durrani did was he placed a cannon right in the middle of the mosque, took aim at the pillar and fired 2 cannon shots right at the pillar. Now, the remarkable thing is that this pillar was constructed sometime in the 4th century and it didn't break. 2 point-blank cannon shots fired right at it from a distance of maybe 10 or 20 feet. And what ended up happening was these little few chips went flying. The cannonballs themselves broke, but the pillar didn't. After which they gave up and sort of moved on. So this happens to be the remnants of the cannonballs which were fired by Ahmad Shah Durrani. Now, the last stop at the Kutub Minar, after which we'll move on to a new site. Now, this is a very interesting feature in the Minar complex which not a lot of people visit very often. Now, clearly this is a sundial. The sundial is named after this person called Gordon Sanderson, and therefore it's called Sanderson Sundial. But who was Gordon Sanderson? No one seems to know. You see, Gordon Sanderson was a young Englishman who studied architecture in Cairo and then joined the Archaeological Survey of India, right in the early 20th century. Now, why Gordon Sanderson should be carefully studied by every Indian who loves their country is that he was given the task by the Brits to figure out whether the job of designing New Delhi should be given to British architects or Indian architects. Now, Gordon Sanderson, being a Britisher himself, was of the clear opinion that this is an Indian city and therefore Indian architects should construct it. And he wrote a report to that effect and submitted it to his superiors. Unfortunately, they didn't agree with him and they scrapped the report. In 1914, Gordon Sanderson was called to the front to fight for his country in the First World War. And in the voyage, he fell in love with a beautiful woman, married her as soon as he got off the boat in London, and conceived. Unfortunately, he went to the front a few weeks later and he died. So he never got to sort of meet his child. And that's where the story of Gordon Sanderson should have ended, right? Except when the story of his unfortunate death reached back to his colleagues in India, they decided to construct this little sundial in his memory. But this stood at the side of the Kutub Minar for nearly 50 to 60 years, and no one knew who this was attributed to. Until in the early 1980s, Sanderson's grandson found a lot of his granddaddy's papers in the attic and released them in the public domain. And that's when we got to know who Mr. Sanderson was and what his unique role in India's history was. And if he was alive, and he would have become a great architect, and maybe the face of New Delhi would have looked very different. We never know. See, there are 3 words which are written around this sundial. The words are Umbra, Lux, Permanent. And there's a little chip in the 4th corner where clearly there was something written, but that's fallen off. The question is, what was this? Right? And if any of you know this Latin phrase, I mean, feel free to go for it. I wasn't aware of it myself. The phrase starts with the question mark and then it says umbra, lux, and permanent. So would anyone like to hazard a guess? Get it if you Google very quickly. I'm very sorry, I just gave it away. Yeah, but go for it.
Just taking a guess.
Yeah, what does this mean? Go for it. Tell me what this means.
Is it a phrase or just
Yeah, it's a
word?
phrase. It's transit, umbra, lux, permanent. It means something.
I just know the meaning of the words.
Yeah.
Umbra would be an eclipse, maybe. Lux would be sun or something to do with light.
That's right.
Next two ones.
Yeah, so you're
How does it
absolutely correct. Umbra actually in Latin is shadow. That is where the idea of an umbra and a penumbra comes from. The phrase means that shadows are temporary, but light is permanent. Right? And that was what they wrote in memory of Gordon Sanderson, who died at the tender age of 26. Funnily enough, the word transit, which is supposed to mean temporary, has fallen off. And every other word remains. So that's sort of quite apt. And that is Sanderson Sundial. Now, we now continue our journey. We move from the late 12th century to sometime in the middle 14th century. Now, the thing is, we've all heard about the Kutub Minar. A lot of people might have been to it as well. But the next site that I'll show you, it's very infrequently visited, criminally under-visited, I would venture to say. This actually happens to be the royal palace of Muhammad bin Tuglak. Now, we've all heard of Muhammad bin Tuglak. We've heard a lot about the things that he did, the good and the bad. But Muhammad bin Tuglak ruled right from the middle of New Delhi. This happens to be located bang in the middle of Sarvopriya Vihar, which is nowadays a posh urban suburb. And if you walk through Sarvopriya Vihar, I'm sure you've all heard of the Mother Dairy there. Just right next to it is this amazing royal private palace of Muhammad bin Tuglak. To add some more intrigue to it, Ibn Battuta, when he visited India in 1334, stayed in this palace for approximately 8 years. So this is the significance of what is today known as the Bijay Mandal. So let's take a closer look. Now this happens to be the Diwani Khas on your left, and there is the Diwani arm on your right. And what you can see here are the private bedchambers of the Sultan, of Sultan Muhammad bin Tuglak. This is where he stayed, this is where he spent his days. And this was the fireplace where possibly his meals were cooked. Now, let's move on to another question. Right beside his bedchamber, you will see that there are two gaping holes, or to put it more correctly, two vaults on the floor. We can also take a closer look at this. Now, can anyone tell me what this was used for? We didn't know until 1980. Yeah, go for it, please. I'm sorry?
Fireplace.
No, the fireplace is what you saw right before this. I'll just show you the fireplace again. See, this is the fireplace. That's what I thought as well. Brilliant guess. That's what anyone would think, right? And in fact, that's what a lot of people thought. Yeah, tell me, what do you think this is?
I think this is like a garbage can.
Yeah, that's what it's being used for, unfortunately, now. But good try. It isn't a toilet, it isn't a garbage bin, neither is it a fireplace. It's something much more mysterious. There's a lot of intrigue. Yeah, go for it. No, good guess. Again, no.
Is it treasure?
Yeah.
To keep treasure?
Yes, that's right. These are the treasure vaults of the Tuglak dynasty, and right before them, the Khiljis. So the story goes that there were two huge covers, one over this vault and the other over the other one right beside it. And the Archaeological Survey of India didn't bother lifting those covers. Okay, just as a quick side note, you'll see in the Tuglak period, there's a reversion to the Hindu style of architecture because they're again using vertical pillars and horizontal beams. Easier to make, lesser material required, gets the job done pretty effectively. We'll now start climbing up to the top of the Bijay Mandal to get a truly fascinating view. Let's enter this room. You'll see that there's this nice window, and if you wait for the right moment, you'll get this amazing picture where the sun sort of comes through really nicely through the window. Let's climb a little more through this staircase, and we get to the top of the Bijay Mandal. Now this is where Muhammad bin Tuglak stood and surveyed his kingdom. This is what was known then as the city of Jahapana, which means the refuge of the world. And at that time, where the buildings now stand, his armies would have paraded. So this is the view that he enjoyed. And I really encourage you to visit this place. It's right in the middle of Sarvopriya Vihar. And once you've gone there, you'll see that there's just one guard who sits in the front. He doesn't care whether you go in or not. There's no one who visits. You can spend a fascinating evening over here, and it's a lovely spot to view the sunset, actually. And the last stop on our journey today, let's move a little ahead. And we now come to sometime in the middle of the 18th century. We are in 1754, and we're still in New Delhi. This happens to be Nawab Sabdar Chang's tomb. Again, this is a place that a lot of us probably have visited, we've heard about, but the history of the man himself, Nawab Sabdar Jang, is very, it's understudied. You see, he was the second Nawab of Awadh, the Suba of Awadh. As the Nawab of Awadh, he also happened to be the Prime Minister of the Mughal Empire. And you will know that at that time, the sun of the Mughal Empire had started to set. And the personal sort of power that the emperor enjoyed had diminished. And it was the Prime Minister who was calling all the shots. And that was Nawab Sabdar Jang. Those of you who are familiar with the history of Bengal will know that this guy's son was this person called Shuja-ud-Dawla. And Shuja-ud-Dawla fought the Battle of Buxar alongside Mir Qasim, which he lost to Robert Clive, ending in the Treaty of Allahabad. So let's try and explore this place a little. On your left is the tomb of Sabdar Jang. Can anyone tell me, on the right, what this image is? That's correct. And every architect, every historian, they sort of decry Sabdar Jang's tomb as a very bad copy of Humayun's tomb. And you can understand their point. You see, the quality of material used at that time was very poor. The proportions are not as correct and accurate as the ones in Humayun's tomb. Let's take a closer look at the domes themselves. Now, the thing is, Humayun's tomb was constructed in the mid-16th century, and Sabdar Jang's in the mid-18th. 200 years more Humayun's tomb, but it's pristine white, without any need to be cleaned. But on the left, Sabdar Jang's tomb, the marble has yellowed. This is because the quality of the material was poor. They didn't have enough money. Let's take a closer look. Look at the quality of the material used for the edifice. On your right, again, Humayun's tomb, very high quality red sandstone. And on your right, again, the quality of the material is poor and therefore the color has faded. But the thing about Sabdar Jang's tomb is that if you aren't an architect, if you are not a historian, and the only thing that you want to do is appreciate a monument in all its splendor, try and visit it during sunset, and you can capture some truly amazing photos. This is the Moti Mahal, which is on the east of Sabdar Jang's tomb. This on your right is the ceiling of the tomb itself. There are some very nice angles that you can get, especially as the sun is about to set. And as you're exiting the tomb, try and frame the dome against the setting sun. What will happen is that you'll notice that the shadow of the dome, the shadow of the tomb itself, will start flickering in the setting sun, just as Nawab Sabdar Jang himself did in the dying rays of the sun of the Mughal Empire. So that's sort of it with this journey that I've taken you on. And thanks a lot for your time. This has been a true pleasure. This is my blog. It's called justontheweekend.wordpress.com. What I do is I visit all of these sites on the weekends. I click pictures and I explore. If you read my blog, there is no narrative. It's all a list of questions. And there is some trivia. The idea is to excite you. It's to encourage you to go and visit these places. But the reason I've come here is to tell you that if you want to be a blogger, you don't need to be an expert in any field. This blog is about photography and history. I am a lawyer, not a photographer, not a historian. It's just a passion that I have, which I sort of cultivate on the weekends. The sort of surprise is that I will be starting my own guided tours of many of these sites later this year after the weather is more agreeable. So you can sign up now by visiting this URL, or if you want, you can come up and scan this URL, scan the QR code on your phone, and it'll take you right to my blog. Thanks a lot for your time, and it's an honor to have been invited here. See, the prize, you have two options. Either you can go up to the library and get yourself copies of books, whoever's answered the questions. I believe I got 3 correct responses. Or you can be the first people that I take on tour in November 2022. Perfect. More than happy to do that.